The UK is home to around 200 working heritage railways of all shapes and sizes. Employing some 4,000 people and with 22,000 volunteers, the 13 million paying visitors to those railways who are members of the Heritage Railway Association take 18.6 million passenger journeys each year, cover some 130 million passenger miles, and contribute around £600 million in value to the UK economy. Yet, storm clouds are gathering. The sector has experienced significant cost increases of late, most recently in Rachel Reeves' budget, thanks to substantial increases in employers' national insurance. For many heritage railways, it's either adapt or face the worst possible decision. Steve Oates is the Chief Executive of the Heritage Railway Association, and I've come to the Isle of Wight Steam Railway, a railway close to Steve's heart as an islander himself, to talk about the challenges facing the whole sector and whether there is cause for optimism or real concern.
Steve, we're here on the Isle of Wight Steam Railway at Haven Street. I have been before, it's a long time. I'd forgotten quite how idyllic it is. You've got a fairly long association with this railway, don't you? And it wasn't always like this.
Certainly wasn't always like this. I started here, and in fact, this is why I'm involved with Heritage Railways, really. I am an islander, born and brought up here, although I no longer live on the island. But I'm still involved with the Isle of Wight Steam Railway. But I started here as a 13-year-old in the mid-1970s, when it looked very different to how it does now. The railway had been going, 4 or 5 years by then. It was simply the station building, which is behind us, and that was pretty much it.
That was it.
And the island platform. None of the buildings and development you see now. That has all grown up over the last 45, 50 years.
It is superb to see. And of course, the island had quite an extensive rail network at one point, didn't it? I mean, I guess this and the line to Shanklin's all that remains of a once quite extensive network.
A lot of people are surprised to hear there were 55 miles of operational railway on the Isle of Wight. Virtually every town and village was connected. The only bit which wasn't was the bit which is called the Back of the Wight, from Ventnor up to Freshwater. There was a proposal for a line there, but it never went forward. Right. But yeah, 55 miles of railway line and actually some pretty intensive services because, of course, the Isle of Wight is still a significant holiday destination, but it was a very major holiday destination from Victorian times onwards because, of course, Queen Victoria had her principal home here at Osborne, where she spent probably the bulk of her time. So courtiers came and lived here, hence some of the development around the island, and that started to attract visitors. But in its real heyday, in the 20s and 30s, I mean, you can see pictures of the queues down Ryde Pier, the whole way down the half-mile pier and so on. It was massive. And the trains in and out of Ryde and Ryde Pier, you know, trains were leaving and arriving every 5 or 10 minutes at the height of a summer Saturday. So it was a very busy, intensive service. But you're right, what remains now is the 8-mile Ryde Shanklin line, which is part of the national network, and the 5-mile steam railway here.
But that sort of 5-mile steam railway is, I suppose, indicative of a wider movement and what is now your day job. So you've been a volunteer, you ended up being chairman of the Isle of Wight Steam Railway, you are now chief executive of the Heritage Railway Association. Just tell us a bit about the HRA. When was it formed? What does it do?
The HRA is the trade association for UK heritage railways, in fact UK and Ireland heritage railways. What's a heritage railway? Well, a heritage railway is like here, the Isle of Wight Steam Railway, but it also takes in a lot of minor railways. For example, the railway at Longleat is a member of the Heritage Railway Association. What we do, we act for those heritage and minor railways in a variety of different ways. So whether you're the railway at Longleat or a smaller railway like Helston in Cornwall or a major player like the North York Moors or the Festiniog and Welsh Highland, we all have the same sorts of issues. And the HRA broadly breaks its work down into sort of 4 or 5 areas. One of the key areas is advocacy and lobbying. We are looking at what the government is doing. We are watching legislation. We are looking at new proposals and so on. We're responding to consultations to protect the sector. I mean, right now, the terrorism, protection of Premises Bill, which to all for all intents and purposes, most people see Martin's Law, sensible, good stuff. The impact on a lot of businesses and places of interest like this and heritage railways hasn't really been appreciated. So we've been doing a lot of work to see if we can get some amendments to the bill, and through our president, Lord Faulkner, who is still very active in the House of Lords, trying to get some response out of the government to say, look, there's some unintended consequences here for organisations like this, for charities, for heritage organisations and so on. The Digital Markets and Competition Act, which was passed, I believe, last year, there's further legislation under that. There's implications of that which could be massive for heritage railways. So there's just two current examples of the sorts of things we deal with.
Things that no one would think of normally, but yet, you're having to...
As well as more obvious stuff, 3 or 4 years ago, the Environment Bill, we worked really hard, and we did get some amendments on that, because at one point we were thinking some of the way this is worded could prevent some heritage steam operations. So we worked hard, that was in 2021, again with ministers, to ensure that there weren't any unintended consequences of legislation and proposals which could affect heritage railways. So we do a lot of work in Parliament. Obviously Westminster is the main player for that, but Senedd in Wales as well, Holyrood in Scotland, very occasionally in Northern Ireland. But it's really important that we're keeping an eye on that legislation, responding to consultations. And we sometimes respond to government consultations and you look at it and go, is there really anything for heritage railways? And you go, actually, yes, there is. And in fact, when I started this role in 2018, it's when I first got stuck into what was then my first consultation response. And it was actually a DEFRA consultation document on the burning of domestic fuels. That's what it was on. But through that, we started the whole lobbying on coal, because it was through that, when I read it, I thought there's some unintended consequences here, or there's some implications for the wider coal market. And I think us and one or two other organisations, such as the National Traction Engine Trust at the time, getting involved and looking at that. I think DEFRA are a bit surprised at what they'd opened up, because that opened up much more the whole conversation on coal. So that's one very important area that we work on. And we've got resources focusing on that. Our legal team, as I've mentioned, Lord Faulkner and so on. One of my team in the organisation, there's only 3.5 of us, but one of his key roles is keeping an eye on all that legislation. And in turn, we also push out every month a document called Insights to all members to keep them updated on that sort of thing as well. And also, with the ORR as well, sort of advocacy and lobbying and representing the sector to the regulator. In fact, regulators, because it's not just the ORR, it's Her Majesty's Inspector of Mines for the cliff railways, the funicular railways. So that's one whole area. Beyond that, we do a lot of guidance, notes and so on, everything from the Boiler Code of Practice to any legal issues, equality, diversity and so on, maybe heritage, business, museum. So we've got a number of committees and we provide a lot of guidance notes and information papers. We do a fair amount of PR, not doing the PR for the individual railways, but effectively things like this, actually. But quite often we'll get asked by radio or television or regional national press or the trade magazines, they want a statement on behalf of the sector, or they want a viewpoint from the sector. So we're often providing that as well. We do a fair number of events. Couple of weeks' time, we've got the spring conference, some really key issues there, particularly this spring, on the impacts of weather on infrastructure following the incident at the Severn Valley a few weeks ago and Brecon Mountain just before Christmas and so on. We've got some really in-depth look at that, but also looking at other items at the conference, things like safeguarding coal and net zero and so on, safety and so on. So we do a number of events, we do workshops across this time of year as well. So there's a lot of things that we're doing on behalf of the sector. We are there to represent our members, but to support our members.
So it's an extraordinary, comprehensive role, and I hadn't really thought about those things where government could do things for all the right reasons in one part of the economy or society, and it has unintended consequences. One of them, which is very specific, I know, coal, right? And we're here on the Isle of Wight steam railway, so you need to burn coal. We don't mine coal anymore in this country. And I know that's had an enormous impact in terms of cost. It's one of the areas where it's really hurt. What is the situation on that in particular? Is it now resolved, or is it still a big issue?
Well, I'll start by saying we're still allowed to burn it. There was a question mark, and we wasn't perhaps a major question mark, but it was something we focused on. I mentioned the Environment Bill in 2021. That was what we were focusing on, because we didn't want any unintended consequences of suddenly, oh, hang on, you can't be doing this anymore, in due course. I mean, it's only recently, in recent months really, that electrical generation has stopped using coal, albeit, we import a lot of electricity into this country. Where does that come from? Coal-burning power stations on the continent. But we'll put that to one side. Steel is stopping its use of coal, but there's still a couple of million tonnes burnt in the UK. Of course, that's tiny compared to what it once was, but it's still a lot of coal burnt in the UK for things like cement manufacture and so on. But basically, the situation is changing. And yes, you're absolutely right. There are no mines in the UK mining bituminous coal, which is what Heritage Steam burns. So it's being imported. All the arguments, all the discussions about imports and dragging coal from halfway around the world, I wouldn't say they've necessarily fallen on deaf ears, but we are where we are. And, there are no mines in the UK. Coal is still coming to the UK. What's the future? Well, our focus now is on what we're really terming the challenge of net zero, because it is a challenge. But the starting point is, what is net zero? A lot of people just assume, we can't do anything. Well, there's lots of things still going on.
There's a key in the word net.
But I suspect a lot of people don't really understand what that means. Where we are, we're sitting in an idyllic heritage railway station, but above us, there's jets coming in from the Mediterranean and so on, burning goodness knows what. The road here, we can just about hear the traffic in the background, just going under the bridge here at Haven Street Station. What are they burning? Petrol, diesel, and so on.
On a road, by the way, that's bitumen and tar and is a petrochemical byproduct.
So one of the things we have to do, and finding different ways of talking about it, is going, what is really meant here, and why do you want to pick on? Because sometimes it does feel as though you're being picked on. Oh, because coal's the dirty black stuff. Well, is it really? Coal is compressed energy. Coal is actually one of the most useful sources of energy, and one of the most efficient when it's burnt properly. And one of the issues we have now, some of the coal we're bringing in from overseas, is all right. It burns. It's a bit smoky. It's not as efficient as good Welsh steam coal or some of the coal coming out of the northeast pits used to be. So we do have these sorts of issues, and we have to get across the message. What do you really mean about net zero? And please don't make us an absolute minnow in users and in terms of any pollutants and so on. Don't make us a scapegoat, because there's plenty of other things which should be being focused on first. We got a lot of support on that, but it is a continual uphill struggle. And of course, currently the conversation has changed because of what's happened globally. Conversations about tariffs and so on. Well, what if some tariffs are put on bringing coal into the UK? We've already had colossal rises in coal over the last 3 or 4 years, largely because of Ukraine and so on. What if suddenly it goes up to £700 or £800 or £1,000 a tonne? What if? What
does it cost today for a tonne of coal?
Around about 350 quid.
It's about 350 quid. But if we look back 20 years ago, I know there's inflation, but what sort of difference are we talking about?
I'm not entirely sure about 20 years ago.
Okay.
But just in my time in this role, that's gone up about 2.5 times. I mean, at the start of Ukraine, it went up 3 times. I mean, there were some tonnages being sold at about £550, £600 a tonne. Yeah. When Ukraine started, there were some railways paying 110, 120, but the average was about 160. So
and now we're 350,
and now we're about 350. So it may not go up anymore, but that's the risk, and this is the sort of thing we're having to focus on and get these messages across. So and of course a lot of this on coal has been done without really focusing on those users like heritage steam, ourselves, road steam, maritime steam, industrial steam and so on. Also, there's still pretty high number of rural domestic users. You know, it's not just a few thousand, it's at least a six-figure sum in several rural areas where they're not on the mains gas network, and they still rely on coal. So there are a lot of users of coal. But it's almost like, oh, it's coal, get rid of that, you know. And there's a lot of contradiction, you know. When that consultation I referred to from 2018 came out, on their own figures, and I wasn't the only one who pointed this out, on their own figures, the burning of wood in a couple of million wood stoves, which of course have been rapidly put into households over the last couple of decades, was as polluting, if not more polluting, than coal. But that quietly gets pushed to one side.
Because it's wood, right?
It's wood, it's all right, you know. So these are the sorts of things we have to get these messages across. It is an uphill battle. It is an uphill battle.
That takes us really neatly onto finance generally. You know, again, we're sat here at Avon Street. It is idyllic. Everything's neat, tidy. There's a real ale festival going on behind. There's no problem here. This is all perfect, right? But the heritage sector has got some significant financial challenges, aren't they? Just give us a sense of what some of those are. And I presume they're not evenly spread. Some are in more challenging situations than others.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yes. Well, let's go back. How did these railways start? You know, right back to the beginning. OK, the Talyllyn was started all, but bit different actually, because they did employ people right at the beginning and so on. But a lot of railways, including this one, basically was started by youngish chaps who just thought, wouldn't it be a jolly wheeze to save some bits and pieces? You know, we love railways, let's see what we can do. The situations in the 60s and 70s were very different to where it is now, and BR were pleased to get rid of stuff, and county councils didn't quite know what sometimes to do with the land they'd suddenly acquired and so on. And a number of organisations managed to persuade these bodies to say, oh, can we buy a locomotive off you, or can we do this? And of course there's the whole Barry scrapyard story as well.
Yeah.
But it was basically a lot of people at the time where, well, we're not going to take no for an answer. You know, of course we can do this. And so they did. But regulation and finance and so on, and what they wanted to be, was quite different to what they are now. And of course, as time goes on, a lot of those original people are getting older and so on, and there's been a struggle sometimes to get enough people to help make them happen. And there's a lot of railways. You know, some people say, have we got too many heritage railways? You know, that's not really for me to answer, but it is a it is a consideration. And so the way they built up, some of them, many of them, have turned into, by definition, tourist attractions, visitor attractions. That takes you into a whole new area. And you couple that with the preservation, the restoration issues of old kit, which was disposed of by railways on the national network for a reason. There's a lot of cost involved, and they're often being run on a fairly fine balance, a lot of heritage railways. And one thing which perhaps isn't recognised enough is when things haven't gone quite right, it's always been a bit hand to mouth. Lots of exciting, we managed to get this locomotive done and this carriage out and so on, or extend the line and so on. Sometimes without really thinking what that costs. And one of the reasons is fundraising and people putting their hands in their pockets. Benefactors. Somebody with deep pockets would go, well, here's 50 quid, here's £10,000, here's £100,000, you know, and so on. And a good example of that was during COVID, you know, when over £6 million was raised rapidly by people putting their hands in their pockets, you know. I'm not decrying that, absolutely brilliant. But when it comes to running these railways as businesses,
it's not sustainable.
That's not sustainable. And now the chickens are coming home to roost. It was all very hand to mouth before COVID for a lot of railways, not all, but for a lot of railways. And now, going into COVID, and now some of them are thinking, how do we really run this as a business while still being heritage? Because we're heritage businesses. Heritage is the brand. You want to understand what that means? Look at the National Trust. The National Trust maintain their historic houses and so on, but there's lots of commercialism around them, which they try and work hard so it doesn't detract. That's a real skill. Some railways get it right. I'd contend that this one, the Isle of Wight, gets it right, and there's a number of them get it right like that. Some have pulled back from being pure heritage. You know, we're a steam railway. You know, we're there to provide trips. I mean, Dartmouth Steam Railway, for example, brilliant. You know, and they meet up with the pleasure boats on the Dart and so on. So there are different versions of them, but the real key is running these as businesses. And when you come out of COVID and you get Ukraine and coal prices go up and steel prices go up and cost of timber and all the other resources, and then you get a budget like we got in the autumn, which is
we'll come back to the
huge
budget,
amounts of money and so on, it's tough. And, you know, have we got some of the right governance in heritage railways? Have we got people sat on boards who really understand all these issues, the financial issues, the safety issues, the heritage issues, and know how to balance them and make it...
The way you're phrasing that suggests that you think we may not do in all cases.
We don't.
Right. I mean, that, because you said the chickens are coming home to roost. I just want to unpack that a bit more if I can. What do you mean by that? Do you mean, are we talking about 10% of these railways could have a real problem, bigger than that? What does that really mean, do you think?
Probably more than 10%.
Right.
Yeah. Because there's always hope. And sometimes in business there's too much hope. Oh, it'll be all right because old Bill or Joe will stick his hand in his pocket. Well, what happens when he doesn't?
Yeah.
What happens when the fundraising doesn't come in, or you don't get that National Lottery Heritage Fund grant or whatever? Because totally understandably, and I feel it, you know, I'm a lifelong volunteer since age 13, I get it. I want to see these you know, go chuff, as I always call it, you know, I want to see beautiful carriages, I want to see lovely stations and so on, but they've got to be run as businesses, because if the people aren't coming in through the door, or not having a great time and putting on good recommendations on TripAdvisor and wherever else, how sustainable are these going forward? You know, the public is compromised at the moment because of the cost of living crisis and so on. So the railways that are, you know, working out how to do it are rethinking their timetables and so on, and they're rethinking the service they run and maybe cutting days of running or number of trains and so on. Not necessarily because they want to, actually because they have to, because they're having to think much more commercially.
Yeah.
Some know how to do it. Some are really just scrabbling around and trying to work out what to do. And the key issue that the HRA has really noted over the last few years is, of course, like with any business, it starts at the top.
Yeah.
It's the governance. If you're more interested in the colour of the locomotives rather than the balance sheet, should you really be on the board? And that's the sort of issue which...
So one railway where I know, for instance, I think they are getting it right, and you know we should declare that the general manager is also the acting chair of the Heritage Railway Association, is the Festiniog and Welsh Highland, where they have moved, I think, quite sympathetically and sensitively to a commercial tourist operation. But there's still a lot of people I know going, yeah, but that's not, we want a proper timetable, it needs to be a proper railway, and actually you've turned it into a little bit of a tourist attraction. Is it possible, in your view, to find that perfect balance between a preservation, restoration, heritage railway and a sustainable tourist business that can survive in 2025?
Yes, but we're having to find the way to do it.
Right.
So in the meantime, people are changing and adjusting what they're doing. And no, I get what is said about the Festiniog Railway, but you know, when you say a proper timetable, what do people actually mean? I mean,
that's a good question.
A proper timetable, what, from the Festiniog when it was a slate railway, which
Exactly.
might have had a couple of passenger trains. I mean, I don't know the detail of the background to the Festiniog Railway, but what do people really mean?
Yeah.
Because you're still on the train, you're still getting the heritage experience, you're going to beautifully restored stations. If you want a proper timetable, do you want proper stations that maybe have been a bit scruffy at times and not particularly well kept? No, because what heritage does, whether it's a heritage railway or the National Trust or English Heritage or historic houses, whoever it is, we are presenting a representation of what we think it was like. And to attract Joe Public for them to think, oh, I can imagine this is what it was like. Behind us on the platform here at Hayden Street, there's people in what are called traditionally styled uniforms. This station tries to present us with a 1940s Southern Railway. Is it really? Because actually there's lots of buildings here now which weren't here prior to 1971. In fact, they weren't here when I started in 1975.
Yeah.
You know, and so the uniforms, yes, they're a suitable nod to what was worn at the time, but they're not authentic uniforms. So what do we really mean? What we all do in heritage is present the best we can to give people that real feel, that real experience. But of course, Joe Public don't just want to come and, you know, ride on a train. They want other things as well.
Yeah.
They want the refreshments. They want the cafes. They want the shops. They want the real ale festivals today. You know, and like a, you know, Tanny Bulch on a whichever weekday it is in the middle of summer. They want a jazz band on the platform and so on. Why shouldn't they? Why shouldn't they? You know, National Trust properties are holding rock concerts and so on.
Yeah.
So why shouldn't we? And I have to say, if all heritage railways focus it on is the very small percentage, and I'd contend it's a single figure percentage of real enthusiasts who say things like, oh, well, I want a proper timetable. Well, might as well shut up shop and
Wow.
and
I
go
mean,
home.
that's pretty profound. And look, I agree with you completely. You know, I'm 60 next year. I have no memory of steam on British Railways. None at all. I mean, I just about was there when it finished, but I don't remember it. So as you say, you're doing the best you can to present something as it might have been for today's audience. And I think that's very wise. Michael Draper, the erstwhile general manager of the Severn Valley Railway, once famously said, we do have far too many railways. And that was then, right? And there's quite a lot happened since. We're going to have to go through a process of rationalisation. I know you're a trade association, you're chief executive, all your members are created equally. I get that completely, and you've got to look after them all. But if you take a more sort of abstract look at it, might he not have had a point that in the end, there's only so much leisure money, and if you're not careful, there's too much supply?
There is only so much leisure money, and that's the reason that these have to be run on a business footing.
Okay.
Because these businesses, if run well, they are popular. The heritage railways are popular. The ones that provide experiences are the most popular. And if you do things well, you'll get what I always call your unfair share of the cake. Because if you're doing things much better than the wildlife park or the other heritage attraction nearby, the historic house or whatever, or making it more attractive to come here than sit at home watching telly or going to the beach or whatever, then well done you. But that's what you have to do. You have to make it attractive and put on more things. Here we are on a cold February day. This railway, this is the first time this railway has opened at February half term for some years, actually. And it's doing it because it's Railway 200 year. And it was thought, well, but what else can we do? You know, there's a couple of Victorian locomotives running and a diesel, which has just gone past. These are quite unusual to have these all out together. So it's nice from that point of view. There's also a real ale festival on, you know, and it's half term, so it worked. But that was thought through, not just to go, oh, let's put a train service on and see what happens. Let's do some add-ons to it, and that's just here in February. So lots of railways, you know, of course, the bigger railways that have got the suitable facilities, they'll do the wine and dine, the Sunday lunches, the murder mysteries on the trains, and so on and so forth. They will have ones that have music events or poetry festivals or whatever it may be, and so on. So, you know, and other vintage vehicle shows associated and so on. These are all the things you have to do to attract new and different audiences all the time. Because if we're not doing it, the other visitor attractions will.
No, you're quite right. Let's move on to another quite sort of challenging topic that's become more of an issue as it must become more of an issue in the last few years. And that's volunteering and also, I suppose, you know, diversity. You mentioned it earlier on when you were talking about some of the things that the HRA does. The world's changed, and yet some railways have really struggled to change with it. Where are we in terms of that, in terms of welcoming young people, women, a much more, I suppose, inclusive rail? And what can the HRA do to really not only support that, I suppose, but also really promote that?
I mean, let's just take this railway. It was largely started, well, in fact, it was started by two 14-year-old schoolboys. You know, two 14-year-olds in 1964 who first had the germ of the idea. In fact, one of them is, he's either guard or signalman today.
Still here?
He's still here.
Still here,
yeah.
Brilliant.
So, and I started as a 13-year-old. For some reason, a lot of railways, as the younger generation got older, seem to think, oh, well, you know, we know how to do this. What do they know? The youngsters coming on. And I think a lot of time people forget that they were once those youngsters and so on. The other aspect to that which has happened is, of course, if you don't get people young, before you know it, they've got GCSEs and A-levels in university and other halves and partnerships and relationships and so on, then go and find a life and get a job and so on. And, you know, legislation has changed in terms of when people can really start to volunteer and get involved. And there's been a colossal growth in so many other things to interest young people, not least of which is everything on the palm of our hand, all the electronic devices and so on. So it has become more difficult. And what a number of railways, and it's not just railway organisations, what a number of organisations have failed to do really is to focus in on that and think, what made it attractive to me all those years ago? So what do I need to do to make it attractive and welcoming to younger people? And some, as you said, do it extremely well. And some almost don't seem to bother. And I fear for them, because as people get older, they can't do as much as they used to. And there's not so many opportunities made available. And of course, those railways are probably, you know, lessening in their impact and what they can actually do. And then, you know, in terms of diversity, in terms of females and so on, and that's women of all ages, they should be welcomed with open arms. And again, some railways do. Of course, some women will go, well, I want to do a steam train. Why do I want to do that? But some relish it, and some want to really get involved and do. And whatever anybody's sexual persuasion is, whatever their age, whatever their ability and so on, there's a role for them at a heritage railway if the heritage railway makes up its mind that that's a good thing.
You made the point, I thought, very, very fairly a little while ago. You said, look, if you're the kind of person that is more concerned about what colour the loco is than whether or not you've got a sustainable financial business, are you really the kind of person that ought to be on a board? I mean, I would sort of put it to anybody, really. If you're the kind of person that doesn't understand about embracing anybody and everybody who wants to be involved and safeguarding and all of that kind of stuff that goes with that in terms of Equality Act stuff, you've no right to be on a board either. I mean,
I agree with you 100%. 100%. Absolutely right. Because I said earlier on, you know, everything starts at the top. Governance starts at the top.
And leadership.
Yeah. And if the board is people all of a certain age, all male, you know, all of an older generation and so on, how representative are those of the youngster, male or female, who's looking in at that railway and going, I wonder what that's like. Oh, that's love old fuddy-duddies.
Yeah.
Where's the person like me sat on that board, says the young chap or the young lady, you know, or the person with a disability, or the person, you know, of different ethnicity.
Yeah.
And alongside that, you know, where are the people, obviously, as we said, who just provide that different diversity of thought of mid-age, you know, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, both from, you know, not just from a male perspective. We're talking about visitor attractions here.
Yeah.
You know, it's puzzled me. It's puzzled me here. And actually, during my spell as chairman here, I have to hold my hands up and say, I didn't do very well on this because I didn't diversify the board as perhaps I should have focused on it. Because, and that's not for want of trying, but let's just face it, when a family is on holiday and want to go somewhere, who makes the decision? Is it dad? Is it mum? Is it the kids? Where's their voice on the board if the board are all 60, 70 plus male railway enthusiasts?
Yeah.
Does that really work? I don't know, but I don't think it does. It's got to have that diversity of age, thought, ethnicity, abilities, and so on, as well as having, the appropriate skills, as we said earlier, on finance and safety and heritage and all those areas.
Because you're running a business.
Because you're running a business.
You're running a business.
And so, the HRA has been really focused on this for some considerable time. We were still in COVID. Well, I'll just preface this by saying, of course, in previous roles prior to this role, yes, I've done the training on equalities and so on, but I was very aware, of the situation within Heritage Railways when I came into this role. And it was during COVID, I actually attended an online roundtable discussion led by the Heritage Alliance. And I was one of only a few people there, and I found myself sitting there and saying, I know, now I'm talking about it, that this is not front of mind enough. I know everything we're talking about, and thank you for reminding me. But I said it there, and somebody picked me up on it and went, that's a really interesting point. Of course, it's not front of mind. I sit at a board meeting or in a management meeting, and it's not front of mind. I said, that's what we've got to try and do.
Yeah.
And when we came out of COVID, it was November 21, we had our first conference, for a couple of years. And I made the morning of one of the 2 days focused on EDI. And we had 3 really good speakers, and there was some pretty challenging stuff was said, some of which then came out in the media and so on. But I did that intentionally, and the board wanted us to do it. They're absolutely behind it, the board of the HRA, because we have to bring this to the fore. My goodness, we got some criticism. Why are you talking about that old stuff for? Well, we don't want this, don't want that. Hang on a minute, hold on a minute. I'm really amazed you're telling me this, and we were challenged and we were criticised and so on. And I stand by that was exactly the right thing to do, because leading on from that, we created a committee, of people, a couple of whom spoke at that conference, looking at EDI issues. And over a couple of years, they presented some really good documentation, which is now on our website, our members area on our website for members' use. Is a whole suite of documents and guidance notes on EDI and so on. And we continue that. We continue that challenge. The EDI committee has taken a little bit of a lull for now, but I've now got somebody to chair it again and now take it forward with the new team to go to the next stage. And we keep this very much to the fore. Another area, for example, for some years, the HRA in its annual awards has done the Lord Faulkner Young Volunteer of the Year Award for young volunteers under the age of 25. Get some really, really good applications. This year, the awards were a couple of weeks ago, won by a young lady from Tanfield Railway. Year before, it was a young chap from Downpatrick in Northern Ireland. These are people who are there doing really good stuff, and just in 2 years, male, female, so we're out there banging the drum on this, and we're talking about it, whether it's governance, whether it's young volunteers, and everywhere in between.
Do you have any teeth? So if you were to see a railway or an instance where clearly there were problems that weren't being resolved, can the HRA do something about it, or ultimately is it down to the railway to sort it out?
Ultimately, it's down to the railway. We're not a statutory authority. No. We have no mandate. What we do have is a code of conduct for members. Again, it's not mandatory, but effectively, if you're signing up to be a member of the HRA, which the vast majority of heritage and minor railways are, you sign up to this code of conduct. 2 weeks' time, at our AGM, we are amending our code of conduct, or we're presenting an amendment to the code of conduct to strengthen the EDI clause within it. So it's a live issue right now. So we're hoping that the members will go, yep, get that, good thing.
Do that.
Do that. So, and it's simply saying, to members, certainly in relation to volunteers, because volunteers are not protected under the Equalities Act and other legislative items and so on, but do things for volunteers as if they were covered.
That's crucial.
Effectively what we're saying, and that's going into it's in the draft code of conduct, or the redrafted code of conduct that's being presented to the AGM in a couple of weeks' time.
Okay, really important stuff. Let's just move on to just talk about the challenges facing the sector now. You touched on the budget. So as if it wasn't hard enough, as if it wasn't, finances were difficult, and all of that, the next thing we know is the Chancellor of the Exchequer, in a wisdom, jacks up employers' national insurance, increases national living wage. We were talking to Paul Lewin, acting chair, who I think he said that the sort of surplus that the Festiniog and Welsh Highland makes each year is around 200,000. That budget alone has wiped it out.
Yep.
I mean, surely it's going to tip some over the edge. Is that a clear and present danger now? And is that the biggest challenge facing the sector?
Well, it's the most immediate one because,
Right.
of course, this comes in from April. We've known about it now for 2 or 3 months. Comes in from April in the new tax year. And yes, Festiniog on Welsh Highland Railway, a couple of 100,000 cost. I'm told that North York Moors is about £250,000.
Jeez.
Here, employs about 35 staff plus some seasonal staff. I think it's around about 50,000 quid, added.
These are big numbers.
These are big numbers. And of course, we know elsewhere in business, we've got, supermarket chains saying this is going to cost us millions. So what are they doing? They're cutting staff or doing what they can to mitigate against it. Now, you can take a political viewpoint here, which is not for me to do. I get why it's been done. I do understand it. I think if there is a key issue, it's did you really have to do this all at once? Surely you could have brought this in over 3 or 4 years if you had to do it at all. It's almost like a double whammy. It's a big figure and it's happening straight away. And you're going from already fairly testing tax regime and so on, and other cost challenges which we've already spoken about for heritage railways, and suddenly you've got this. But again, it comes back to those railways that are well governed, good management, astute financially, will get through. The Festiniog will get through. The Isle of Wight Steam Railway will get through. And of course, some railways doesn't affect them at all because they're still 100% volunteer run.
Indeed.
Or incredibly small numbers of staff, maybe 2 or 3 members of staff and so on. But there are some where, I do fear for them. It's the latest in a series of cost issues which just seem relentless.
And I worry as a finance person by background about reserves or lack of reserves. You see a railway, the poor Severn Valley Railway, and I know that section of line has always had challenges. That landslip, my heart, as many other hearts, sank when you saw that, because that's a huge cost. Not only is it going to be a huge cost to fix, it's the loss of income whilst they're in the process of fixing it. So that is the double whammy. I mean, these railways just don't have the reserves to cope with too many of those kind of events, do they?
No, and of course, for a railway like Severn Valley, just coming out of all its challenges before, during, and just after COVID, and Gus and his management team really doing superb work to turn it around and get it on a firmer footing. Still, still shaky, on the balance, and then something like that happens. I think they're incredibly lucky to have the board they now have and to have Gus, because Gus has been very sort of. No, laid back's not right. Of course he hasn't been laid back. But he's gone, it's happened, just get on with it.
Yeah.
But also because of the arrangements that sort of under the re-energised management and governance of Severn Valley, they've got that superb relationship with Network Rail where, they're already straight away to be able to put things in place, get appropriate engineering expertise in. But you're absolutely right. I mean, that's a massive hit, a massive cost. And as an aside, and this is no consolation to the Severn Valley, but as an aside, I'm sure the good people of Bridgenorth and elsewhere who run businesses are going equally, oh no, what's going to happen to our business?
Yeah.
And if anybody ever wants to understand the economic impact of a heritage railway, it's that.
Yeah.
It's that. Because when the Severn Valley sadly had that major slip again a few years ago, or probably 20 years ago now, some businesses have just shut up shop because they were not being served. And so it's a multi-impact. And that's the value of heritage railways to their local areas and their local business communities. But something like that is absolutely massive. And of course, let's not forget Brecon had it just before Christmas. Downpatrick flooded November 23. Isle of Man railways had problems, or the tramways had issues. There's lots of Ecclesbourne have had an issue. West Somerset had an issue. All weather-related impacts. This is increasing. And actually, it's one of the reasons why we've got, a key focus on this at our spring conference in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah.
On the impacts of weather. This is not getting any better, and I think Network Rail would tell us, as if we hadn't already noticed, some of the issues they're now having on landslips.
Yes.
We're running on Victorian infrastructure. This railway, right,
Literally,
was
yes.
built in 1875.
Yeah.
It was cheaply built, but it was hardly the highest quality, intercity line. This was a rural line on the Isle of Wight. Some days it's probably a more intensive service on this infrastructure, the formations and so on, and road over bridges and under bridges and culverts, than it probably ever had for some considerable years. And you have to watch this stuff. So again, I'm going to come straight back to governance.
Yeah.
Has every railway got in place the checks and balances on the bridges, on the embankments, on the culverts, on the cuttings and so on? I know the Severn Valley have, and it won't necessarily prevent an issue, but you're doing as much as you can to at least be prepared and to mitigate, and to put the budget in when you have to. And
So you have the reserves. No,
and
I
not just
completely
keep
agree.
saying, let's paint another locomotive. No,
Yeah.
focus on the infrastructure as well.
Final question. It's a big one. Right. You've been in the role now for 6 or 7 years.
7 years, yeah.
7 years. If you look forward to the next 6 or 7 years, I'm not suggesting you've got to do this for another 16 years, but do you feel optimistic about the outlook for the sector? Do you think it will actually look quite different in 6 or 7 years? And I suppose the other part of it is, what can the HRA do and is doing to give the sector the best possible chance of success in the future?
That's a massive question.
It
isn't
was rather, wasn't it? I apologise for that. Break it down.
Where will it be in 5, 6, 7 years' time? And am I optimistic? Oh, yeah, I'm optimistic.
Is that just because you're naturally optimistic?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I am naturally optimistic. But you have to be optimistic, because if you're not, I can't talk positively to railways. I could sit there and go, it is a bit like that, isn't it? What should we do? No, you don't do that. We think things through.
Yeah.
We're business people at the end of the day. We're business people in a particular part of the business economy. We think things through and we make them work. I think in a few years' time, things will look a bit different. I think we still will be burning coal, but we'll be further challenged on it. But that's our job and everybody's job to keep getting that message through and so on. I think there'll be more diesels running. I mean, there's a bit of a upswing in diesel interest. Fine, it's great. But let's not forget, diesel fuel is going to come under pressure as well. I'm hoping we'll be further advanced on research for sustainable alternative fuels and of some sort. Don't really know what. A huge amount of work's already been done, but I've got to take that forward. What I really hope, and I think if railways do sort out their leadership, their governance and their forward thinking, is that more and more of them are becoming first-class heritage visitor attractions, providing experiences. Yes, they still provide, going back to the earlier question, their traditional timetable from time to time, but they're really appealing to a wide cross-section of people as visitors, as volunteers, as staff, as trustees and so on. So they become, really all-encompassing and popular attractions. Some of them already are massively popular and so on. But remembering they're in competition, and there's a reason, we do this. We're important. Heritage railways are important to the UK culture. We're important to the visitor economy. There's a number of heritage railways that are the anchor attraction. Click your fingers and the Festinian Welsh Highland Railway disappears. What's Port Maddock? Click your fingers and the Swanage Railway disappears. Is Swanage and Purbeck really what it is now? And so on. Maybe not quite so important here on the Isle of Wight, because there's other major attractions like Osborne House and so on.
Yeah, you'd miss it.
But you still miss it. 100, 110, 120,000 people come to this. This is the second, third, whatever it is, biggest attraction on the island.
Yes.
It's still significant. There's lots of railways where they are the anchor attraction. And even if not the anchor attraction, they're a significant player in their areas. So I think because the message is getting through, all the things we've touched on EDI, on governance,
Yeah.
on running as a business, but remembering you're still a heritage business.
Yeah.
And exploiting, if I may use that word, your brand, if I may use that word, words that are foreign to some people in heritage railways, but that's what you've got to do.
Yep.
Exploit your heritage brand and make it work so that those of us who love heritage steam, love the atmosphere, love the stations, the buildings, the line, the locomotives, the carriages, we're doing it as well as we possibly can, a faithful recreation to the best of our ability, but is commercially popular with all the bells and whistles on it, you know, in terms of events and activities and so on, to make them attractive. If railways are doing that, and there are many which are already doing it and others that are moving that way, then yeah, we're going to be a great sector. We're going to be a really strong sector, because I also know that other sectors are not doing it and are way behind where we are. Sometimes we, you know, some of what I've said today may sound as a little bit, you know, ooh, we're a bit of a problem area. I know we're further ahead than some other sectors on some of this stuff. Yeah. You know, we've got it all to play for. Yeah, we've got the challenges of you know, political things and so on, and who knows what's coming. The new government is only 7 months old. There's a lot of stuff coming out from this government, and we're watching it carefully. So the part of your question where you said, what can the HRA do? We will provide the leadership we can. You know, our board is made up of people who are running heritage rails and tramways. You know, they're not just anybody from outside, although I probably could do one or two outside views and so on, you know, going back to that governance point, give it that wider feel. But we are, you know, we are focusing on helping railways be as good as they can in all of those different aspects. And, you know, I often have a conversation with people. It's just an art. You balance safety with commercialism and finance and heritage. It's very simple, really. It's only three things, but that's what it's all about. Get those three right in equal measure. What a business we've got, and what a future heritage railways have got. So yeah, I am optimistic despite the challenges, and whatever the HRA can do to lead the way, collaborate, share knowledge, get information out there, get people talking to each other. That's what we'll do.
Brilliant. Well, listen, thank you for your time on that. I'm getting that message loud and clear. Optimistic about the future, but you've got to adapt. You've got to be agile. You've got to be well-led, well-governed. You've got to run a business. These are different things, perhaps, than when this railway started 50 years ago. But if you do that, the future's good.
The future's good. The future is yours. Yeah, there's some key words you've just used there. That is absolutely the case. Yep.
Brilliant. Steve Oates, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.